Good afternoon everybody and welcome to the inaugural Glasshouse Chat. I'm Pastor James McKenna. The Glasshouse Chats are going to be about talking to members of our congregation and really getting to know them, their Christian journey, where they've come from, where they've experienced God in their lives. Once a month we'll be having these chats, and it might be you that I ask. And today, for the first Glasshouse Chat, we have John and Paia Ingram. So, John and Paia, thank you very much for being willing to be the first of the chats that we have at Glasshouse. For those who don't know, John is our church council chairman, and Paia is everything to support John and the church. And you tend to do a lot in the church, don't you, Paia?
Yeah, I'm an elder in the church.
You're an elder in the church?
Yeah.
Yes, and what else do you do?
And Bishop Glasshouse view, the old people's songs. So that is my big duty in there.
Yeah.
I go into Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays visit them, and Thursdays church service, all different denominations in there, and I round them up to let them know that church will be on 10 o'clock in time.
Yeah, that's great. So basically what I want to do is go back, way back, to where you both met. I understand that you were married in 1970?
That's right. Yeah.
That was a great year, folks, 1970. I was born in 1970, but it was more probably because these two were married. And you were married where?
In Gabagaba, my village, central,
And
Papua New Guinea.
In Papua New Guinea?
Yeah.
And John, I understand that you were working there as a teacher, is that right?
I went to Papua New Guinea in 1968. I spent the previous 2 years in Malaysia.
Yep.
As an Australian volunteer, teaching in a Malay school in Malaysia. I then went to Papua New Guinea and I was resident tutor in the university, which was only in its second year in PNG. And I was a volunteer in the university for a year and then stayed on in PNG and worked in the College of External Studies, developing an English course, and then after a few months I was deputy principal and then principal of this college.
Yeah.
Had been involved, or had visited Gubba from when I first went to PNG with some university students, and met Paia, not really in the village, more in Port Moresby, in an association for people from Gubba.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the beginning, and then we were married in August 1970.
So that was a month before I was born.
Well, you're very young and we're very old.
Well, I don't feel that I'm young, that's for sure, but thank you, I will take it. And how many children do you have?
We've got 4 children.
And is the firstborn is
Ranu.
Ranu, who happens to be the behind the camera actually today. So we want to thank her for again being part of the inaugural Glasshouse Chat. So she does a lot with her and her husband Mark in our church as well. So Ranu first, and then you have who?
Then Iraleke, our son, and then another daughter, Tao, and our youngest daughter, known as Paia, but her nickname is Pixie or Piccolo or Pico.
She's so tiny, so that's what children call her.
Okay.
Pixie or Piccolo.
Yeah, and how many grandchildren do you have?
We have 14 grandchildren.
14, and do they mostly live on the Sunshine Coast?
We lost 2, and the other 2 is, in Darwin, but they recently joined us.
Yeah.
Their father is here, so they.
And there are 2 in Cleveland.
two in
So
Oh, okay.
the majority live in the Glasshouse country. But,
Yeah, right. And in terms of when did you move to Australia?
well, yeah,
1973.
1973 I took a job in Adelaide to establish what was then called the Aboriginal Community College.
Okay.
That was in 1973. Ranu was about 18, 19 months old at that time.
Okay.
We only had the one daughter then. So we were in Adelaide for 9 years, and then we moved to Darwin for 27 years. And
You must have liked it there, right?
yeah, I worked in Aboriginal education, and was in most of that time I was there. Well, in fact, all of the time I was there involved with Aboriginal education and training. Most of the time I was in charge of Bachelor College.
Yep.
And during a period of fairly rapid growth in the college. It was a college specifically for Indigenous people, particularly people from remote Aboriginal communities in the territory.
And how did that make you feel as you were setting this up and seeing the growth?
I mean, I began life as a teacher in Queensland, and then went overseas, and I suppose I saw my calling as a Christian was in education. And as I went on in the early years of my career, I felt that I had a role in moving across cultures. And the 2 years in Malaysia, which was a tremendous experience, both professionally and in my life as a Christian. And then involvement with Aboriginal people in Australia. I first became involved in 1973. I mean, I taught Aboriginal kids a bit prior to that when I was teaching in Queensland, but I learned a lot about Indigenous people when I went overseas. In terms of Aboriginal people, because people asked me about them, and I found that I had very little knowledge of them. And the Aboriginal Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, have been very much marginalised, certainly 40, 50 years ago, more so then than now. But I like to think that some of the education programs that have been provided, particularly to adult Aboriginal people, which is who I was working with, has made a difference to the role of Indigenous people in Australia and the understanding of Indigenous people in Australia.
Yeah, okay.
There's a long way to go, but it's better than it was 40, 50 years ago. And my role as in charge of colleges, and I mean, the Bachelor College in the Northern Territory, when I went there first, it had 100 students. When I left, it had over 2,000 students.
Wow.
But my role as a director was in terms of setting a direction. And the direction that I set was what I heard Aboriginal people in the community saying. It wasn't my vision. It was the vision that I heard them express for what their future was and what would enable them to achieve that future.
Yes. And
I mean, I see that as very much part of my following the way of Christ.
Yeah.
But,
and you're a twin. You're an identical twin.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've seen the photos. Unbelievable. You know, there's identical and there's identical. I couldn't believe it. And while this was happening, Paia, over these 27 years in Darwin, what were you doing at the time? Obviously, bringing up children would have been.
Well, you know, when we arrived in 1982, we settled down for a few years, and then our children went to Marara Christian School.
Yes.
And then there was a job in there, special ed, so I applied. I never had.
So special education.
Yeah, disabled people,
Yeah,
because Marara Christian School integrate the disabilities, and I apply and I got it. I never have experience in this area, but because working in the old people's home, that's opened the door for me to see, how I can, give the listen to them and
Yes.
what they want, and to learn from them.
Yes.
So that's how I got the job, and the children were in same school, so I was in there as a part-time, not full-time.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed working with them and learn from them, because one was a disabled Aboriginal boy on the wheelchair, and three or four of them were Down syndromes, but the others were in other classes with slow learners and all that, and they have a bit of problems in their areas.
And yeah.
But they integrate them in the classes, so the group I have them is, they were with my children, like Ranu and us, not Ranu, Paia, little Paia and Tao. They were in same classes, so I was in the class to go in. We have a teacher in the class, but I really want to learn. It's a Christian school, and I've been brought up in a very heavily Christian upbringing.
Yeah, well, that was my next question. You've been a Christian all your life, and you started in the United Church in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah. Well, I was adopted out of 10, and I was brought up very strictly in the family. Apparently, my mother's older sister adopted me, but they never tell me that she was related. She was a sister of my biological mother and father. So all my growing up is, I know that she was my really father and mother, and my biological mother and father was auntie and uncle.
Okay.
Yeah, very strictly, they never tell me. It's our custom that they not to tell you.
Yeah.
And adopted mother and father. Father was very sick, he's a doctor. And I follow him everywhere, and I became very close to them. And my grandfather and mother is my mother's father and mother.
Yes.
And my adopted parents look after them.
Yes.
So I learned a lot from all my growing up. Is these 4 people are always with me, or always telling me what to do.
Yeah.
And Sunday is very strictly for us. We go to church, we come home, we don't go anywhere, just sleep and eat and read, and they tell us stories. And nighttime comes, it's a strictly night, very strict.
Yes.
7 o'clock bell goes, you come and sit around, they tell you the story of Bible stories and prayer. Prayer was the important thing that I grew up.
Yeah.
We wake up, we sit around and pray, and cup of tea, prayer, breakfast, prayer. Everything you eat is prayer all the time.
So it's like continuous prayer, which is a discipline, but very, very powerful.
Yes, and we pray and go to bed.
Yeah.
The thing they do to us is, our grandparents is, we sit around in circle, and he have to sit in the middle or near us, so we're very close to him, close knit in the circle.
And you've spent a fair bit of time still, like prior to COVID hitting us, you still spend a fair bit of time in Papua New Guinea. You've still got a home over there, I believe, is that right?
Yeah.
And it's one of these homes above water?
Our house is actually on the land, but
But you grew up in one on
the house part grew up and was built out over the sea. And a lot of houses are still built out over the water.
I tell you, was there anyone in your family that was a sleepwalker? Because they would have been in trouble.
Oh yeah, one of them, my second sister, first and second one, if we sleep, she will be, our houses are all kunai grasses,
Yes.
and she will be climbing up, and my father will go and pull him down. Biological father. I sometimes spend night with them.
Yeah,
And I
okay.
will call out to Uncle, she's climbing up again, and
Yeah.
he will come and put him down.
And where did you learn to cook? Like especially those scones that are so good. Did you learn that? Is that a Papua New Guinean recipe or?
No.
No?
Our cooking is we never have stove. Just make a fire and.
Yeah. What are they called? It's not a hungy.
Damper. We scones are called damper.
Damper.
You mean the moon?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a special time when wedding or after funeral they make a feast.
Oh,
and
really?
They pile up all the stones and bend them hot and put the yams and all taro and sweet potato on top and cover them with coconut leaves.
That sounds lovely. I reckon there's a lot of land here where we could dig one of those.
Behind the shed, we've had a couple.
Oh, you've had a couple. So yeah, well, I'll look forward to that next celebration where we...
I'm too old to dig the hole in now.
I'm happy to dig the hole, you just do the food prep. But where have you seen God working in your life?
Well, to me it's in the through my growing up, and when I went to high school, I missed my grandfather and adopted mother, and because when I was in high school, my grandmother died, and my adopted father died in my arm. I was just 11 years old. But all my growing up, he always tell me, you have to talk to God, talk to God. And I keep praying, my eyes are open, praying. But God never talked to me. So I swim down to the beach and went to the church. I was praying in the church. I was praying in the church and like somebody was trying to grab me. I didn't say amen and I ran out. I ran, it was very dark and close to 7 o'clock. I ran all the way, jump in the water and swim up, and grandfather was calling me, Pai. So I said, Pai 6-7. And where are you coming from? I went to church to pray. Why? Because my father said, I must talk to God, but he doesn't talk to me, so I went to church. Then he said, God is always with you. Wherever you go, he's there. You don't have to go to church and look for
Yes.
So from there, I said to myself, oh, okay. So I went to high school. All along, I always prayed and put my Bible under my pillow and sleep.
Okay.
Because that's what I became very close to God, I guess. I pray and sleep. Wake up, read and sleep.
The Word. And John, in your life, where have you seen God at work?
It'd take a long time to explain that. I grew up in a Christian family, and in my early teens, I won't go into the details, but experienced what is usually referred to as a conversion experience. It's really becoming aware of the strong presence of God and of Jesus within our life. Many important things. My experience in Malaysia was very important. When I was in Malaysia, I lived in a school compound with Malay teachers who were all Muslims. There was a Chinese guy who was a Buddhist. There was an Malaysian Indian who was a Catholic. The most common, they were all young men, more or less my own age. Probably the most common discussions that we had was about religion. And I found a great deal in common between my faith and that of the Muslim teachers who were there. A very important experience in there was when the Indian Catholic guy didn't go to church at Easter. And probably the most devout of the Muslim young Muslim teachers took him to task, saying, you grew up in a Christian family, you know you should have gone to church. At Easter it's the most important time in your church's celebration. Why didn't you go? Now, that was a Muslim strongly supporting the Christian in his Christian walk. And the commonality between what they believed and what I believed was much more in common than differences.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many other experiences. I suppose I felt that a part of my calling was in education and particularly working across cultural barriers and particularly working with people who had been marginalised, who didn't have the same opportunities that I'd had. And I mean, I worked with Indigenous Australians who worked in Papua New Guinea, worked in South Sudan prior to the peace treaty, developing a teacher education program there for teachers who had very little education, and elsewhere as well. Well, just one other example of the reality of the presence of God. When I'd worked in South Sudan from 1999 through till 2001, and then I worked in Papua New Guinea. And while I was there, the attack on the Twin Towers in America occurred, and the media was all full of anti-Muslim.
Yeah.
Now, the situation in South Sudan was that the Muslim Arabs in the north were fighting against the Christians in the south. Now, that's oversimplistic, but that's what it was. Anyway, in 2003, I was asked to go back to South Sudan to review the course that we'd set up and how it had operated. And frankly, I was pretty scared. The media was saying that Muslims were bad people.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't my experience, but that's what the media was saying. And I remember one Sunday morning, Paia was away at the time, and I decided, no, I can't go back to South Sudan. It says too much imposition on my family. They'll be worried about me when I'm there. Even though I knew that I was working for the UN and all the security issues that were in place there. Anyway, so that morning I decided, right, I'm not going back. I'll tell them I'm not coming back. I then walked around to church that morning around the corner from where we lived in Darwin. And the sermon was about finishing the work that you've started.
Wow.
So, it wasn't, I mean, I'm sure the preacher didn't know that his sermon was directed at me, but I went back to Sudan as a result of that.
Is that right?
And I was there for a few months, travelling around the country doing various things with this teacher education program.
And your favourite hymn?
Well, there are several. I mean, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, I think probably would be one, but an edited version. I don't agree with all of the theology and that hymn, but it's a nice hymn. Amazing Grace, of course, is everybody's favourite. And because of my wealth ancestry, Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer.
Oh, yes.
Qumranda. Every important Ingram event has Qumranda in it.
Okay. And so, in terms of your role in this church, you're obviously the chairman of Glasshouse Country Uniting. What is your hope for the future?
That I'm not chairman for very much longer.
How long have you been doing it for?
Much longer than I said I would be when I first joined the council. I've probably been chairman for about 4 or 5 years. Which I think is too long. But things have changed in the last couple of years with COVID. What's my vision?
or your hope?
My hope, I think, more than a vision, but we live in an area of growth. The Glasshouse country is growing rapidly, and it's intended that it should grow. And in 2019, we were averaging about 55 people in the congregation every Sunday morning. That's dropped off a bit because of COVID.
Yes.
I would hope that the church can grow, not just in terms of the people who come and sit in the pews on a Sunday, but in terms of the involvement in the community.
Yes.
If the church isn't involved in the community, then it's not walking the way of Jesus.
Yeah, amen.
The problem we have, of course, is that
A lot of old elderly people.
so many of the people in the congregation are elderly. I mean, I'm probably around about average, and I'm 82.
Yeah, so you multi-generational, you'd like to see within...
We need more young people. I think there's two potential for greater involvement with the multicultural community in this area. There's a small number of Indigenous people who live in this area, but there are Indigenous people. And they have no involvement in... Well, there's only 2 people, Indigenous people, who have been involved with the congregation here in the last few years. There are many refugee families living in the district, and we have no involvement there. Yeah. So I think there's potential for growth and for diversifying.
Yes.
That in response to the call of Jesus, I guess.
Yes. And what actually brought you to the Sunshine Coast?
The Sunshine Coast. I had 2 sisters living on the Sunshine Coast. And the rest of my family live in or around Brisbane.
Yes.
It's easier to get to Papua New Guinea from Brisbane than it is from Darwin, in fact. So
it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So we were, and I mean, as a child, I used to holiday on the Sunshine Coast at Maroochydore. And Paia was always liked this area when we visited here. So when particularly Paia actually found Darwin getting too hot for her.
Humidity.
Yeah, humidity is too high.
Yeah, it's a killer.
We decided we'd come here.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much again for volunteering to be the first of the Glasshouse chats, and God bless you both for what you do for our church. It's invaluable. There's so many cliches that I could say about you both. You've got a wonderful family as well, so it's something to be really proud of. And thank you for the work that you do for our kingdom here. And folks, it might be you next time. God bless you.
Yesu laura, Yesu laura, Yesu laura, ini torea toma, lau Yesu la lokana, yamase.